Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. So my name is Lauren, and I'm joined with Ashley here. And Ashley is a digital learning coach. Ashley, do you want to give us a little background on yourself?
Sure. I'm from South Carolina, and I work in a small rural district, and we have a little over 2,000 students. Previously, I served all four schools in my district, and right now I'm stationed at our high school, and I'm kind of serving the others remotely. But I have a background in early childhood and a master's in educational technology, and I love helping teachers support students and empowering them in becoming, self-directed learners. And I'm excited to be here today.
Great. Well, I'm excited to have you. And my name is Lauren. I'm the marketing lead at Unruly Studios. We're an ed tech company that's all about mixing STEM and active play. And before that, I spent 3 or 4 years in the 3D printing industry, which was awesome. And so I got a passion for technology and making learning more fun. All right, so Ashley, we're going to talk all about student-led learning today. So why don't you kick it off by kind of giving us a background on what student-led learning is and its relationship with student agency.
Okay, great. So this is a topic that I'm really passionate about, especially this year with our students not all being here in the buildings with us. So student agency really is students taking charge of their own learning and acting on their own interests and learning about things that interest them and really assuming responsibility for their own learning to serve their purposes. So really, I love this analogy, students as drivers of their own learning. Barbara Bray outlines these characteristics about students with agency. And I'm not going to read all of them, but just take a moment and peruse this list and think about the students that you know. In my district, we are heavy into personalized learning, and this is where we want our students to be. And we realize not all of them are there. But this year, we got to really thinking about what our students needed to be able to work from home, to work virtually or in a hybrid environment. And we realized they needed a lot of these characteristics. So today, we're really going to be focusing on some of these, like being proactive in their learning, knowing their purpose for learning, engaging strategically, and this is important, without waiting to be directed, setting goals, as well as being self-directed and monitoring their progress and reflecting on their learning and demonstrating evidence of learning.
I like the comic that you included here. I think it really reminds me of all those exciting breakthrough moments when you figure out that problem. And I think that student agency is all about creating those opportunities.
Right. And I hope some of these resources will help teachers, start to put some of that initiative in students.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we know what student-led learning is. Why create opportunities for student-led learning? What are sort of the benefits?
Okay, so I want you to take a minute to imagine what a typical day might look like for your students. In my district, some of our students are face-to-face part of the time, and then we have students that are virtual too. But just even students that are face-to-face full-time are dealing with things differently this year than they did in the past. And so I think about the burdens that might be on them because of our current circumstances, but especially students that are learning virtually. You don't always know what support they have at home, and they might be the only one in charge of making sure that they are going to school virtually. Or, they might have to look after younger siblings. They might have a parent there that's helping them all along the way, but the parent might not know about all the different things that you use as a teacher for learning, especially with technology. So if we can look at things through a student's lens, then we can really understand that they need to be in charge of their own learning.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's important now with so many students learning virtually. And again, this quote's from Bray. Students must develop the capacity to engage strategically without waiting to be directed. They need to take ownership and responsibility for their learning and possess skills to learn independently without heavy dependence on our direction. And this reminds me of, in another book that I've read, Students at the Center, Personalized Learning with Habits of Mind by Kalik and Zunda. And the authors noticed that in early childhood classes, you often would see students, self-directed. They're moving around centers and, maybe not this year like they have in the past. But when I taught second grade, if I was working with small groups, whether it was during reading or math, students were making choices as to what activities they were doing. They might be shopping for books in the school library. They might be choosing math manipulatives. And then when it was time to change, you would see them doing, cleaning up and moving to the next thing. And these are procedures that I taught them. But the authors noticed that as the content got more complex, older students tended to rely back on their teachers for direction. However, let's go on to the next slide, Lauren. This really sums it up. We need students to have agency and be resilient right now. And so what we've got to do is give them back their agency. We've got to let go and let them, muddle through some of those bumpy places, the tricky stuff, the hard stuff. We've got to give up some controls. And sometimes that's hard for teachers to do, but it's going to benefit them in the end. So we can allow them to be drivers of their own learning, and we can be co-learners with them in this process. But as you're going to see in a little bit, we're going to talk about students being co-constructors of their learning as well. So all of these things, student agency is going to really be the output, so to speak, whereas the student-led learning activities are your input. So that's what you're going to do to get students with agency in the end.
I think, and that's so important, not only just now, but in creating good teammates for when you're working. I can speak for myself. I think, being able to be independent and to, take initiative and be excited by problems.
Right.
And I love that you, oh, sorry, go on.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, when you look even beyond the lens of our current, with the COVID-19 restrictions and everything, if we look beyond that, it's really students that are going to be 21st century citizens.
Yes, absolutely. And I was going to say, I love that you use the term co-learner, because it just really emphasizes the point that, as an educator, you don't have to have all the answers, especially with, all of the changing things around us. It's okay, to not have all the answers and to learn with your students. So I love that. So let's go into some tips for student-led learning in practice, now that we've talked about what it is and the benefits.
Okay, great. And so throughout this, y'all, I'm going to be giving you some strategies, some ideas, as well as some resources. I'm going to show a few here when I share my screen, and anything that I don't get to, hopefully you'll have access to the links. And there are even access to blank templates as well. So at the end, when you're able to get all the resources, hopefully you'll have a lot in your toolkit to be able to use. So I think that planning with long-term, goal setting in general, but planning with long-term goals is a great entry point for introducing student-led learning. It's a great place for teachers to start, especially if you're not sure where to start. So the first resource I want to look at is this virtual learning plan, and it is from Isabel Morales. I found it over the summer, and there's actually a teacher version too, but she created this My Virtual Learning Plan, and it addresses all these different aspects of virtual learning or online learning, and students can plan out how they're going to address these. But what I like is that it also has them address potential challenges and ways they're going to respond to these challenges. So a great way to start planning ahead, the big picture, and what they can do from the day to day, and how to, again, address things that might come up. Another great strategy for long-term goal setting are vision boards. And here, this one's from an English class. You can see that the students have created or brought in some images of authors. There's some authors' quotes here, as well as some inspirational quotes. So vision boards are a great way to visualize a goal set. A goal for students. And you can even incorporate more text and stuff, plan steps to meeting those goals. But if you're a visual person, this is really great. And I love the inspiring quotes in this example. All right. So I've also included a link down here where it says learn more about the vision boards. Is a great blog post from Casey Bale that explains how she used Google Slides. The example I shared was Google Drawings, but either would be great, and she really outlines how she did it with her students.
I love, and someone else commented on this, but I love that learning plan has them think about the challenges. And we actually do this in our team meetings too. We have what we call pre-mortems, but what could go wrong and how can we address it up front? I think that's very smart.
And then we have some examples of short-term goal setting. And I think this is just as important because I know a lot of students are struggling with the day-to-day. They need to focus on how they're going to get through the week or even from Monday to Tuesday. So some short-term goal setting is also very useful. The first example, creating an assignment for students to share a goal and then later submit evidence. I provided a link to an Alice Keeler article where she uses Google Classroom to do this, but you could use your learning management system. You could also do it with, if you're face-to-face, a paper-based version where students just record the goal, but the importance is to come back and provide the evidence that they've actually met it. Another great example is embedding goals in activities like the choice board that's linked there. And what the teacher did was she provided goal setting for grades. So they took a pretest, and based on their pretest score, they set a reasonable goal for their post-test. And instead of the students having to figure out, well, how am I going to reach that goal? Their choice board was actually contained all of the learning strategies that they needed to reach that goal. Another goal setting resource, and this is actually one that I'm using right now. I'm going to kind of explain it and then I'll click to it, but it's a goal setting work plan, and it outlines different steps of the goal setting, including setting the goal, making a plan, monitoring your progress, anticipating challenges, as well as reflections. And so I'm using this currently with high school students, and it's been very beneficial to help keep them on track. This is an actual student example. And some of these students are new to goal setting. I actually was fairly new to it. I always had goals that I wanted to reach, but in terms of actually planning my steps out, recording that goal, I really only started recently doing that. And you can see that this student is making progress to that. And this gives a lot of information to the teacher. And based on Liza's responses, the teacher can coach her in the right direction. And so we were really just an entry point for goal setting. And so completing assignments is a completely reasonable goal to start out with. And, once you get down the road, you might make more like standards-based learning goals. But right now we're just, dipping our foot in the water. And so her goal is to complete her assignments, and she makes a plan to wake up early and get dressed to start her day. She's allotting time for each class. She's going to use Google Classroom and emails to check her progress. And one of the things I forgot to point out, y'all, is that this work plan, I provided these scaffolded questions. So they're not just thinking, well, how do I make a plan? There's questions there to guide them. And then we're monitoring our progress. I love that she says that she can contact a classmate. I think students, especially older students, need to realize what a valuable asset their peers can be. My high school students have all, belonged to group chats with their peers, and they can use that to keep in touch and make sure they're on the right track with an assignment. And again, that piece of what's going to be challenging, what strategy are you going to use to overcome that? And Liza's got some strategies because she knows that videos are a struggle for her. And as a teacher, I could provide her a strategy like watch it first, then watch it a second time. But she's got a strategy to find a more helpful video. So she's already developing some agency, and I think that's fabulous. And then later we came back and did some reflection. So it's not just I set the goal, this is what I'm going to do, and hopefully I get there. After some time, we came back and reflected on everything, and just to make sure that we're taking the right steps. Or if something didn't go right and I didn't make my goal, what can I do better next time? And as a teacher, you need to provide supports, coaching along the way. And I think something like this, this is from our AVID class. They used a daily tracker to keep up with their daily work. So you could just as easily use an agenda or a daily schedule type thing, but they created this and they were able to personalize it. And this has been really helpful to them. I am going to click back over here because I feel like these resources, you might think that they're geared toward older students, but teachers of elementary students could use something like this as well. You might be recording the students' responses for them. Again, you're going to be coaching them in the right direction, or you might have a question, more simplified, have them draw a picture. And another entry point for goal setting is it's okay for the whole class to have the same goal as well. You don't have to get individualized right away. Now, that might be where you want to head eventually. But right now, we want to start getting students in the right direction.
We had a great question from Nate, too, can you talk just about how much instructional time is devoted to sort of helping your students set these goals?
Sure. So I did the goal setting work plan with, let's see, I'm doing it with 3 high school classes, but one of them is virtual, and that teacher kind of took the lead on that. I pushed into both of these classes. Our schedule has been shortened, and these teachers were willing to give up the time because they knew that this would help in the long run. So it took me a little less than a 1-hour class period, about 45 minutes, because I did actually survey students to see where they felt they were as goal setters. And I wanted to see how their perceptions were first. And then I think I did come back in a couple of those classes and work with a couple of students individually. But the thing about the time sacrifice is that, like I said, you're going to see the benefits down the road. So sacrificing a little bit of time right now is going to be worth it in the end. And the English teacher that I worked with, she agreed with that especially. She wanted her students to have the agency and to participate in this process so they would take responsibility. Because what if you don't do this and then you don't see the benefits, and so nothing comes from it, and then you're still stuck in the same place. So let's invest a little bit of time now and reap the benefits later.
That makes a lot of sense.
And there was one more resource about setting SMART goals.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you want to get smart with your goals and try that out, in that resource, the students actually define each of the things about the SMART goals. And so that's a little bit more advanced, I think. But again, different entry points for where you're at and where your students are at.
And this may or may not be a question on the quiz. So what does SMART stand for?
It stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based.
I love this. And this is one that I always come back to when I set my own goals too, is especially the time-based ones. And
Right.
specific, making sure it's something that, maybe is attached to a number, or you can revisit to see like, okay, how am I doing?
Right. And I think that's important because you want to make sure your goals are reasonable. If you make them unreasonable and you can't attain them, or if your students can't attain them, then they're not going to meet them, and then they're not going to ever feel successful. So you've got to be reasonable with them.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, the next strategy is self-reflection and self-assessment. And I love this strategy because you're really putting the thinking back onto the students, making them think about their thinking, getting that those metacognition skills in. I'm going to share a few resources in just a moment, but I think that this, again, is another great entry point, another great way to start. If you're not sure where to start, I'm going to show you some simple ways. This first example is actually I got from Caitlin Tucker, and the book is, she has a lot of resources. The book I got this from was Balance with Blended Learning, and she called this a living document, an ongoing self-assessment document. And so this is something you could do alongside with the assessments that you're giving. And she had students record the standard and the title of the assignment, and then they scored themselves. So perhaps you would give them the same rubric. Well, of course, you probably gave them the rubric in the first place, but have them assess their work with the rubric that you're assessing and see what they think and how they did. And then they use these questions to actually justify why they gave themselves that particular score. And then she sits down with them and they have grading conferences and compare what she gave them to what they gave themselves. And ideally you would see those, if those two scores are far apart, you would see them coming closer together as students start to realize what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and they improve in certain areas. And I love that she called this a living document, because she might use this same self-assessment document for a particular unit, and you would see growth over time. Another great way to promote reflection and self-assessment is through portfolios. And we have done this in my district in Google Sites. And this is actually a site from a 6th grade math student. And they had, a pretty rigorous explanation for the assignment, but you can really tell that they put a lot of thought into this. This is Ashlyn's project, and she and her mother gave me permission to use this, but you can see the reflection that went into this. And I'm afraid one of these documents might not be shareable outside of my domain, but one of them I think is. And the teacher created, if it loads, let's see. The teacher created this document. I'm sorry, y'all. Here we go. And the students had, within a domain, had to pick 1 or 2 standards. And they looked at the standard and, the skills that they needed to be able to do. There were video resources in addition to the direct teaching and small group teaching that the teacher was providing. And they had to come up with a game or a video. They had to self-assess themselves, and then they had to reflect. And so you can see here, Ashlyn, she wasn't as confident here in the other example in the other domain, she did create a video. And so, let's see if it will load. I was trying to have all of this stuff loaded before, but I can say firsthand the level of engagement that was that you could observe in this classroom. I, as the digital learning coach, went in there and helped them with setting up their Google Sites. I also taught them Screencastify so they could make their videos. She has a video here. And students were so engaged in this whole process. They might stop and listen to me teach about that particular tech tool, but then they'd go back to what they were doing. And you can tell from her reflections here that she could really explain after this process what she knew and what she didn't know about that domain. And again, that was sixth grade, but this can be easily done with younger students as well. So I created this in the spring. It's not necessarily geared for any particular grade, but it's just, some early childhood K through 2 math practice with some 10 frames and little manipulatives, one more, one less. So you can see kids were having to do a different skill each day. Really simple way of having them self-assess is to do something like this. What did you think you did well on? What did you kind of struggle with? Just asking students how they feel. Now, is this going to be, this isn't going to be perfect the first time. They're going to give themselves all smiley faces. But then when you sit down and talk with the student and really ask them direct questions, then you can start helping those, even the younger students, start thinking about their thinking. And then I promise their teachers down the road will thank you. And like I said earlier about the level of independence that we sometimes see in the early childhood classes, that might be the place to get them to start this process, to get them really thinking about their learning. And even as simple as, if you said you did well on 10 frames, why did you choose what you did? And then I think after time, you'll see this process improve. Another example is that I provided a link in the slide to a 5th grade example, but here is the image here. So I made it fun, incorporated some Bitmojis, but this was the slide, and they would look at it not in present mode. In the outside would be text boxes with their standards, and they would drag the standard to the appropriate place on that rubric based on how they felt they did on that standard. And then as a teacher, I can give it a cursory glance, and Johnny might say that he needs to work on fractions. Now, that's not going to be the end all be all, because again, students need to be taught this process. But I can look right quick, and if he says he's struggling with that, then I know that's a great place to start if I'm going to work one-on-one with him, or if I'm going to pull a small group. And then I can go into those that activity or that assignment and assess it like I normally would. But getting the idea of where the student feels they are is a great place to start.
And this is great for personalized learning as well, because if you know that it's specific, every student's going to maybe struggle with different things, and that'll allow you to spend your time where it needs to be.
And I've used a similar, I'm sorry, Lauren, I've used a similar rubric with primary school students as well. And we just use a smiley face and a straight face. Sometimes we don't like to use the frowny face, but whatever, your kids can handle, that's why I like the check, or you could do like a square and a circle, that kind of thing around the topics, whatever works for you and your kids.
Yeah, someone said they like that you have the one category, I need to keep working to keep, it's encouraging messaging.
Right. You want to keep it positive.
Yes, exactly. We did have one question about high school. Now, I think the example that you used earlier was from grade 6, but, would you change anything from a high school perspective?
For the Google Sites, do you think that's what they were talking about?
I think they were asking specifically about the self-assessments. When you're talking about self-assessing.
I think any of this could be just, you would adapt it to your content standards. But there's plenty of rigor in that Google. I think that might have been an honors class. I'm not 100% positive, but again, the level of engagement is what I was really impressed with. And so you make it as rigorous as you need to for your students. And then the sites are just the housing. And so that document too, she had a lot of structure in the document where they were filling out, where they put their game or their video and their reflection. If you want to take a little bit of that scaffold out and allow your students to create more, that's another way to up the rigor as well.
Makes sense to me. Awesome.
Okay, so if goal setting and, self-reflection and self-assessment, I said they were great entry points. This is the more advanced place, is where you actually have students as co-constructors of learning, where you're giving a little bit of the controls, and you're going to shift your thinking from how can I to how can my students. And again, this is from Caitlin Tucker and Balance with Blended Learning. And I tell my teachers, the teachers that I coach all the time, take the work off of yourself and put it on the students, because whoever is doing the work is doing the learning. In that little picture, it says Alice Keeler. I don't think she invented that quote, because I've heard that long before I found that image, but I think that that's such an important point. You want to put as much of the work on your students as possible. Now, of course, you are the person who's in charge, ultimately responsible, accountable for their learning. You have to make sure the standards are addressed, but you want to have them do as much as possible. So small shifts. Instead of creating low-stake formatives with digital tools, let them do it. The best example, I think, is Quizlet. And kids can sign up, make their own account. They can create their own Quizlet decks. You might have to give them some parameters and some expectations, because they can go in and copy them. But we've had teachers do that. And again, low stakes formatives, you're not going to use it as a summative that's going to go towards their grade, but have them share with their classmates. So not only have you put the work on them, they also have an audience. That's another thing that's going to increase their agency, because they're going to want to make sure that it looks good before they share it with their peers. And you could take a unit, you could split it up between kids and have kids do different parts of the unit, or, you could do it however you want, have them work in groups to come up with their own quizzes. So that's a great first place to start. Also, have students become experts in a certain area. And you may already do this. I'm going to use second grade as an example, because I had my second graders do a form of this. We learned about animals, and one group might research mammals, another one reptiles, another one amphibians, and then a fourth group might, birds or fish. And then they actually do the research, curate the sources, and then they present to the class and share that to the class. And so even though each group is becoming experts in certain areas, everybody's learning about everything through the presentations. And then, of course, those students that are the experts in that area, they are really going to know that content really well. Some large shifts in this area are to use an inquiry method to lead students in the right direction. So where it says get the full scoop here, there's a whole article and video that kind of explains this process in detail. But this is what they basically say to do, that you provide students with just a little bit up front, whether it's this image, whether there are images or questioning, to get them thinking about the content that you're going to be studying in that unit. And then have them come to a main idea. And then you want to kind of get their input, what skills and concepts do we need to assess? What tools and resources do you need to master your learning in this area? And how are you going to demonstrate their learning? It sounds really scary, and I think any type of inquiry like that can be, But if you think of yourself as, you're the driver instructor, and maybe you've been driving right now, showing the student what to do. Now you're letting them be in the driver's seat. And you're going to be like the GPS that's guiding them along. So they're not just off on a free-for-all. You've got to still provide them some guidance along the way. You've got to make sure they're addressing the standards. But and I hate to use the word trick, but you must trick them into thinking that they're designing it all. But again, you're kind of guiding them in the right direction. And another large shift would be to do a student created digital breakout. I don't know if you're familiar with breakout rooms. Our district, we love breakouts. We have the physical breakout boxes, and we've also done digital breakouts. But this example, I'm going to show you really quickly, because actually this is one that a teacher created, but I think it could be easily adapted to allowing a student to do it. So she used a Bitmoji classroom. And if you click around, you can see there's clues in these different pictures.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And so,
That's so fun.
honestly, this teacher, this was her first go at this, and she did a great job. The questions are multiple choice. So you might want to up the rigor and make the questions a little bit more difficult. But I immediately thought that this would be a great way to get your students involved, because they could easily, if you had 4 or 5 clues, have 4 or 5 groups, and each group comes up with a clue with some questions like this. And then when they come back here, they would click on here to go to a Google form to submit their answer. Of course, I don't, it's been a while since I've done biology, so I don't know the answers to click through to get to the next page. But I just thought this is a great, easy, well, I hate to say easy, because it may be easy for some and not for others, but this is a great place to start if you want to involve students in digital breakouts like this. And please,
I love how interactive it is.
Y'all please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions about any of these resources. But I've tried to provide as many additional resources, like if I found an outside article or blog post, hopefully there's enough in there for you can find the information to get started on your own. I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
Quick question, just a follow up to the small shifts you talked about, kind of students being experts of different areas. I love that, and I think it relates also to the student roles, which is something that we're definitely a fan of at Unruly Studios, giving students different roles. For us, it's with the coding the games.
Right.
But do you think is that sort of a way to have students break out to be experts in different areas?
Absolutely. Actually, I was going to talk about it in our next strategy, collaboration. I was going to talk about that. So that's a perfect segue. So collaborative learning is another great way to, increase student agency and get students involved in that learning process. And if you are familiar with Fisher, Fry, and Hattie, they just published a book this year with the Distance Learning Playbook. It's a fabulous book. It takes sound teaching strategies and gives them to you through the lens of distance learning. So if you're in that, and if you're doing virtual or distance learning, you might want to check that out. It's a great book. But they say that the routines of collaborative learning help students take more ownership and regulate their own learning. So right there in itself, that's a plus. Of course, you want to have some strategies in your toolkit for that. So I love something as simple as creating an online discussion board in a digital tool like Google Classroom, a place where students can go to ask each other questions. Of course, you're going to be there for them, but as I mentioned before, peers can be a great resource. So you'll have to monitor that. You'll have to teach a little bit of digital citizenship, but have that conversation open for students to ask each other questions. And so they can be leaders in the classroom and help each other out. If you are providing more structured collaborative learning activities, make sure you provide student roles, like you were talking about. If you're going to have a group of students working together, maybe you have a recorder, maybe you have the researcher, maybe you have the timekeeper, that kind of thing. Give them roles and assign responsibilities. And then you want to make sure you have expectations for the group and for individuals, so that Johnny doesn't just sit back and let his group members do all the work. And one way that I've found that's been helpful for that is a peer assessment. A high school teacher here where I work, when she gives group work to students, she might assign one grade for that project, but then she gives them a formula to try to figure out how they're going to disperse the points. So let's say she gave them a 90 and there's 4 group members. Well, they multiply 90 times 4, and then she has a little worksheet and they have to divvy up the points based on who did the work. So if Johnny did sit back, his group members ideally will say, well, you don't deserve all those points because we did the work. And she said that you really would be amazed at the level of conversation, and kids really would justify to their group members, who did what. And then the kids that maybe didn't do a lot of work would own up to it. And then perhaps take more responsibility next time. So that might be something worth trying out. Another thing to consider is to assign those groups based on complementary strengths. So if you think about the roles, if, like you were saying, Lauren, if you knew that one of your students was especially good at the coding, the actual, that techie part of it, you might pair them with somebody else that has a strength in another area, where they're going to complement each other so they can work together to solve a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And we often hear too that sometimes, say, one day you might have, Johnny be in this role, and then the next day he can be in a different role, so that all the students sort of get a chance, maybe that, haven't discovered their strengths yet. They get to see, and then say, which one did you like the best? But I love the peer assessment. That's such a great idea. All right. And one last question I have for you is, what's sort of the impact on student-led learning that you've seen, in practice, either in, virtual learning or in person, and what differences have you seen?
I think really, like I said earlier, it's that student agency and them taking ownership. That's the biggest impact. Also, the level of engagement. If students are not emotionally engaged, they're just not going to be able to think about what you're showing them. So if you can get them engaged, then that's going to be huge. And I feel like when you invite students into the process of, designing learning experiences, or if they know that they are the focus of this learning experience, then they're more likely to buy in. And it makes me think about, we haven't really gotten to the Splats piece yet, but when I was using Splats at the middle school last year, there was a new student to the school, and he was not quite engaged in class yet. He really didn't want to be there, and he had a lot going on at home. And I was with this class, I think about 3 days. And the first 1.5 days, he kind of sat with the teacher. He didn't participate with the rest of the kids. But as he observed what we were doing, and of course, Splats are exciting, but the last day is when we did the hard part. The last day is when we did the math work. And that's the day he stepped in and started participating, because he started to buy into the process. And so it was amazing, the level of engagement that I saw out of this particular student, just as he observed the activities that were going on in the room, because he knew that these kids were engaged and they were enjoying what they were doing.
I love that story. I think, games are, and making things more fun is such a great way to get that student buy-in, like you were saying. But then after the buy-in is there, you can, get them to do the things that maybe they wouldn't have wanted to do if you hadn't had that earlier buy-in. So
right.
I think that's great. All right. So I'm going to give a quick intro since you mentioned Splats. So this is them. You can see them on the floor there. That boy is jumping on them. These are Splats. They are programmable floor buttons that light up and make sounds, and they sense when they're stomped on and pressed. So students code the rules to their own active games that they can play with their classmates. So things like relay races, whack-a-mole, and of course, with virtual learning happening, all across the country and elsewhere, we also have a virtual platform and specific activities and games that were designed for a more virtual setting. And so you can see on the iPad there's this Splats in the left-hand side of the screen where it works exactly the same as it would with a physical splat, when you press on it or press the run button, the same things happen. So I'll just show you what it looks like here too. I got one with me handy. So this is a splat. So I'm going to show a quick video of how it works, and then Ashley and I are going to show you a couple games live to show you how it works. And one of the most fun parts about Splats is when students get to design games for each other. And that's what we've seen, they get so much more excited when they get to play their friend's game rather than a game that's in the app, but we do have both. And so, as I said, we have a full virtual platform, which I'm going to show you in just a second. So, if you don't have Splats at home, or if you're, teaching class virtually or hybrid, we've got tons of options with our app. So it works on a Chrome browser, and it also works with the iPad. So if you go to the Apple store, the App Store, if you just search Unruly Splats, you'll find it in there. And then it's also accessible through any device with a Chrome browser. So we're going to show you a few examples. So voting machine, this is one, I'm going to let Ashley explain what it is, and then I'm going to code it live. So Ashley, why don't you kind of share a little bit about what this program is?
Well, I think the voting machine is probably one of the best places to start with Splats because the code's not too complicated. There are 3 different parts, as you can see in the image, but for students that may be new to block coding, this is a great, again, a great entry point. And I used this in a couple of ways with my students, but one of my favorite ways was the students created the voting machine so they could poll the student body about a hot topic. And we chose, and this was last year, leading up to the election this year, whether they thought the voting age should be lowered to 16. So I had some middle school students code the actual Splats, and then we set them up at the high school and had the high school students vote. So the middle school students really enjoyed that, and then we came back and looked at the results, and then they learned about the history of voting in the United States. So we took the coding and, combined it with a civics lesson.
I love that. We actually did something similar this year leading up to the election. We had a whole lesson dedicated to different types of voting. So we had with using similar code. So they were learning about the Electoral College, which was something that I also, didn't know everything about. And then also ranked choice voting, which was something that was on the Massachusetts ballot, actually. So that was another thing where you think you know exactly how ranked choice voting works, but actually it's maybe a little bit different than what you thought it was. So just to give a quick intro, hopefully you can see my screen here. So like Ashley said, the code for this game is very basic. You can also make it, build onto it and make it more complicated. And you can ask your students for their ideas on how to do that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to differentiate between Splat 1 and Splat 2. So you can here change this and maybe pick my favorite color is purple. So I'm going to say purple. So now when I run the program and press run, it's going to light up my Splats 1 and 2, green and purple. Then I'm going to say, okay, well, when I press Splat 1, I want it to make a sound. and then I want to change the score because that's what, voting is. So we're going to change the score by 1, and then we're going to do a fun trick and duplicate this block, but I'm going to change this to Splat 2. Change Splat 2 score by 1, and then I can change this a different sound. So I'll just show you real quick what that looks like. There you go. And then we could add the colors back there. The reason why it stopped is because it's not in the code for it to continue lighting up. So, but that's just a quick example of how that would work. And show you a few more quick examples. So this was our first ever fully virtual activity that we did, where basically we use the MIDI system, if any of you are familiar, that assigns notes to different numbers. And by doing that, we can allow students to use the splats almost like musical notes. And they can say exactly what note that they want, Splat 1 to be versus Splat 2. And I'll show you a quick video of what that looks like. But this was done by a music teacher who actually found out about Splats through another edWebinar that we did on virtual learning. So I'll show you, this is from her classroom in Florida.
Here we go. 2, ready, go.
And so this teacher actually used them over the summer virtually with her students, and one of them made an Imagine Dragon song, which is incredible. So, when you give students that control over their learning, they'll blow you away.
Yep.
And then another quick example is red splat, green splat. Just like red light, green light, when the light is green, you go, and when the light is red, you stop. And it's totally randomized here. You can see we use the randomize random number. And I like this one for virtual learning too, because you can get them moving. And so if they're on Zoom, you can say, okay, when it's green, run in place. And when it's red, freeze and make a silly pose. So this is another fun one that's actually pretty simple, but it does introduce the repeat do block and also the delay block, which is important. And so we do have a hybrid learning guide, which includes some sort of tips on how to use, we have a whole bunch of activities that were originally designed for in-person play. And so we've added modifications to those and suggestions for how to make those safe for distance learning if you're able to see your students in person. We've added little notes to the activities here for ideas. So I think this was another idea for 4 corners instead of having, if you're not in person, the student for remote learning can put a 1 in their screen to indicate which corner they're going to be in, which is a fun idea. All right, so we've got a ton of free resources here. You can see them all on our website. If you go to unrulysplats.com under Learn More, we have a ton of free lesson plans that I encourage you to check out. One of my favorites is the social emotional learning lessons. Those are very fun and they come with a code download. So if you're brand new to coding, you definitely do not need to have any experience or be an expert in any way. And we also have a Morse code lesson plan, which is also fully virtual. All right. So I hope to see you, soon. Please check out some of our resources and feel free to let us know if you have any questions. Now's the time to ask it in the chat, or feel free to click that question mark to give us some questions. I'm going to go and see in here. I think we had some questions from earlier.
Actually, Lauren, I was looking at the chat and I wanted to address one misconception. When I talked about creating the digital breakouts, I didn't mean like the breakout rooms with Zoom or Google Meets. These are actually breakout activities where students are solving problems to break out of, we use physical boxes and they have locks, but you do it digitally to, it's kind of like the breakout rooms or the breakout places they have where you are locked in a room. It's like a game out in the communities and you have to solve certain clues to unlock the door. These are just digital versions of that with students to solve problems, to get a prize, or so not breakout rooms through Zoom or Google Meets. This is a little bit different.
It kind of reminds me of escape rooms, if any of you are
That's what I
familiar
mean.
with.
Escape rooms. Thank you.
Yeah, those are super fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And so go to Breakout EDU. And if you want to learn more, they have a lot of resources and can answer a lot of your questions.
Perfect. We had one question. I know we're running out of time here, but anything, any specifically virtual tips for anybody who's, fully virtual right now to how to get their students engaged and bought into student-led learning?
I think that everybody really is struggling with that. I can give you all of these strategies, and if they don't show up, it's really hard. Just keep reaching out to students, and whether it's via an email, and not, hey, have you turned in that assignment, but hey, how you doing? Or give them a phone call. What's going on? We have noticed that those kind of communications with the teacher and the student have been so much more productive. Again, even if let's see, how do I want to word this? Emotional engagement is a big piece of engagement. And sometimes they might only engage because they like you. And so if you build a relationship with students, that's a huge plus. And so if they just kind of tune in because, they want to see what you've got to say, or they're interested in continuing to build that relationship with you, then you can get them on the hook and then start, getting that academic kind of content stuff to them. But I feel like it's going to go back to relationships, even if you have to give them a call. And our principals have even knocked on doors, even because we want to know what students are doing. We want to know that they're okay, but we also want them to show up. And so sometimes when they know you care, that can go a long way.
Absolutely. I just did another webinar the other week with a library media specialist we were talking about social emotional learning and how you sort of need to be that leader. And so she will share with her students what her feelings are. And I think that that's also a psychological tool where, if you share something about yourself, then people will like you. So if you're saying, you know what, I'm feeling frustrated today because this happened, then I think students respond to that.
Absolutely.
All right. So I think we're almost out of time. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. This was a lot of fun. A special thank you to Ashley. Thank you so much for your knowledge and your resources. I think I saw, that everybody in the chat was very appreciative of all the things that you linked to. So we've got a lot to check out tonight. And thank you, all of you, for coming to join us.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for asking me to do this. I really enjoyed it. And again, y'all don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them.
All right. Well, we'll leave it for here. But thank you, Ashley. I'm going to take off, and everyone have a great night.
Bye, y'all.
Take care.